don't have to tell you all just how acutely we're feeling those production issues and challenges when it comes to the supply chain right now. Semiconductor shortages, high price spikes in many areas like rubbers and textiles, etc., that are driving up prices. And so this morning, I'm really privileged to be able to bring on one of the foremost experts in assessing this situation. Joe McCabe is president of AutoForecast Solutions, a leader in forecasting and insight on automotive production, sales, and alternative propulsion forecasts. And I think over the last 6 or 7 months, AFS has really become one of the premier trackers of the impact of the semiconductor shortage across the global sector, and you're going to see those figures quoted again and again. And we're really going to, happy to get a bit more insight on that now. But that's not all we're going to hear from Joe. We're going to look across the North American and global market on trends and impacts, what we see in production platforms coming, and some new opportunities as well. So with that, it's really my pleasure to welcome Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Chris, thank you. This is great.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'm going to hand over to Joe. Joe's got a presentation and some slides, which for all of you watching, we're going to make those slides available on the platform. So you can download a copy of them right here on LinkedIn. Sorry, you're going to have to register if you want a copy of that. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you, and then we're going to come back for Q&A. Let's everybody keep the questions coming in the meantime.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hope everyone's a good day presenting this outlook. And as Chris already told you, the idea of looking at North America needs to be an understanding of looking at a global space. We're going to talk about everything going on, lots of data to cover today. And obviously, we couldn't have planned it better with the highest part of the poll being on the accurate production forecasting. So the shameless plug of what AFS does. But and also, as Chris said, there's a lot of charts here. There's a bunch of their eye charts. I don't want you expecting to memorize them or read them or have to take pictures. There'll be copies for everyone at the end. Brief understanding of what we are, what we do. At AutoForecast Solutions, we forecast every single vehicle built worldwide for the next 8 years. Who's going to build it, where, when, how many? We do that down to powertrain level, so that gives a very good optics on the idea of all this electrification, alternative propulsion, all the trends that are happening. We update this data every single month with actual production and then a new global forecast at a monthly detail level. And we actually alert our customers on a weekly basis what changes are coming, plant shutdowns, new vehicles, canceled vehicles, timing changes. And obviously the most pressing issue these days is the semiconductor impact. We're going to talk about that today as well. But then we go a little further. We layer that into portfolio systems, planning systems that we built for the audience out there that says, how do you take this information to make just better decisions going forward? And then finally, the support. We don't believe you should just be buying data from someone and systems and then get a call 11 months later for renewal. We should be your outsourced planning department, really answer those critical conditions of issues that are driving your current, mid, and long-term outlook. So let's dive into that whole conversation. There are many factors that go into building a forecast: empirical, subjective, objective factors. We take in lots of information on any given day that we then creates our monthly forecast for our entire outlook. Sometimes it's getting those business plans at the manufacturers that most of the time are a lot higher than you should expect when it all comes at the end. Bringing in suppliers that are actually building the parts to give them some intel to the conversation. Look at the key performance indicators, all the geopolitical issues, fuel prices, tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole list of things today that I'm not going to read to you. I'm just going to hone in on a few of them. But this idea of shareholder value is a really critical one these days. The idea that most manufacturers right now are saying, hey, we're going to invest in an alternative, an electrified future. And what that does is that drives Wall Street. And when Wall Street drives the stock price up, that is the goal of any publicly traded company, shareholder value. If we can get that through altruistic ways of saving the planet one car at a time, that's a nice little benefit. But the idea of really looking at it, what is the underlying factor of driving all of this conversation in investment alternative propulsion is really important to what we really look at shaping and framing that outlook going forward. But at the end of the day, look at the last 3 bullets, right? This partnership, collaboration, this idea of more people working together for a greater good, this balancing act. How do you really minimize your risk and maximize your opportunity, but don't invest or de-invest in any area too significantly that's going to expose yourself? And how do you defend those core operations and really at the same time identify areas for growth? So we're going to try to hammer in on all these topics going forward. Now, this slide I like to call the evolution of automotive, because it really talks about how, as we have gone into an automotive age, and we can go back 120 years for the conversation here, how this idea of innovation has increased, how this idea of bringing new players. And every time we move the needle forward for better efficiencies of scale, for better ways of performing, for better margins and cost structures, you add more and more stakeholders to the conversation. So it's not just a supplier that's supporting products from a manufacturer and that's going to dealership. It's all the supporting. It's the job you're doing, getting the vehicles from point A to B. It's everything, the secondary and tertiary businesses that are supporting these things. It gets larger and larger and larger. And all these new players are entering the mix. And the idea is, how do we start really disseminating which ones are going to add value to your bottom line? And obviously electrification, if we move all the way down the pipeline here, is an important one. But really the one that's really coming in today is this idea of cooperation. This idea of organic growth for manufacturers to hit these very lofty and aggressive targets for alternative propulsion it's not organic. It's impossibly organic. You're going to see, Ford building products for Volkswagen, GM building products for Honda. We're just seeing that in North America. On a global basis, you're going to see more contract manufacturing approach. So customers like Magna and Magna Steyr are going to be more relevant to the whole calculation going forward. So it's really about saying, who are the current customers we're working with today and what's their footprint, but who are the ones that are coming that we're not paying attention to yet that we should be establishing strong relationships with. So I do want to give a little background on the semiconductor industry, first of all. And we do a weekly analysis, Chris said, every single Tuesday. So later today, we'll have it, that talks about the impact. But I want to give a little history lesson. And history lesson is, helps us say that hindsight is always 20/20. If we looked at a bottom in the past, and let's look at the global recession, 2009, 2010, and call that the bottom. And we have this idea of looking forward and this growth path. Who took advantage of that bottom and basically got out of it and excelled? So if you look at a 60 million unit light vehicle production market in 2009 and a 91 million unit market production in that 10-year gap with no other major disruptions in that space, well, the obvious answer has always been China, right? China said, we're going to be a global force to be reckoned with. We can't just focus on our domestic customers. We have to have a strong export customer. So what do? We're going to entice European and North American partnerships here. They have to invest with us 50-50. We're going to borrow their IP and we're going to learn. Rest of Asia Pacific, still very strong. North America. So you go, that's an easy story, right? This rising tide raises all boats. But then you look at South America, just can't get out of their own way. Geopolitical issues, inflationary concerns, the consumption issues just really cannot get out of their way. And in fact, have lost market size in that last 10 years while everyone else has found way of growth. So you got to look at these and say, what do we learn from this, right? There's those that will look at a very short-term issue of only 2 months out or 6 months out for survival, and those that are looking at this long term. And the story is pretty simple. This long-term outlook, reevaluating your position, re-understanding your new customers and new markets you need to be into, and not being so focused on one, is really where the winning is going to happen. And now the idea is, if we're in a new bottom, what are we going to say 10 years from today? So again, a lot of chart, you'll get a copy of it, but this went out last Tuesday. And we break out the global semiconductor impact on 4 different levels. So we'll use the chart on the right-hand side for this second. The green, yellow, and red are the announced plant shutdowns. We're able to, with our algorithm, take every single vehicle at every single plant, calculate the work day of that plant. If a plant is shut down or reduced in shift, then we can take that information and we can interpret and calculate a volume impact. So the green is the announced volumes that will be recoverable. Large pickups, large SUVs, high value products, low inventory products for manufacturers that they're going to turn off summer shutdown. They're going to reconfigure the labor pool. They're going to find a way to recover that lost volume. The yellow is okay, we're shut down for 21 to 30 days. We're running out of time. Should we even recover it? So we're at risk. And the red are the vehicles that just aren't going to be recovered. A, the capacity is not there, or B, it's just not important. We're not going to be recovering many Chevy Malibus, right? Because the idea is it's a very fleet-based vehicle. In North America, a lot of non-consumers are buying passenger cars. So there's really no reason to go back and pull in that lost volume. And that lost volume one's really important. When we walked in North America pre-semiconductor, we were shooting for a 15.9 million unit production this year. We're now at 15 and a quarter. So we've ripped out a significant amount of production volume. And the blue, because we're in a forecasting business, says, well, we're not done. What is the momentum? What is the change? What should we expect? North America, unfortunately, is in lead in terms of lost volume, followed only by Europe. But globally, we're looking at 285 plants being impacted by the semiconductor shortage. So this is obviously a global issue that's affecting everybody. We can argue 3.5 million units of announced production impact globally, and cresting to 4.6 million when fully forecasted. If we look at that trend over time and we say, hey, let's pick a time and frame, early January is when this whole conversation really started about semiconductor. Obviously, the left bar talks about where it is, but look at that growth, right? Look at that every single week, more and more stories. Look at China. China was able to have some issues, and all of a sudden, boom, they were first in and first out with COVID, and therefore they were able to turn the lights on a little faster than everyone else with their ability to produce. But now they're ramping up. Asia Pacific is now getting a second and third wave of COVID. So we're not out of the woods yet, but we're trying to track this so you can really understand how you plan your business properly. Now, in terms of segmentation, this is where we get into the weeds, right? Globally, crossovers and passenger cars are sharing the water about the same in terms of impacted segments that are impacted by the semiconductors. But North America, the pickups are getting a larger and larger segment. In the first 2 months of this analysis, we were literally at 1-2% with the pickups because this was the bread and butter of the manufacturer. This is where they make their money, all their profitability. Now we move the idea of pickups being 16% of the North America pie. This is where we're seeing some critical hits on the bottom lines of every manufacturer and how they're going to try to then go to their suppliers and all of their supporting pieces to this conversation say, you need to share this pain with me in order for long-term survival. That's always been the case. So in terms of global outlook, 2020 is the blip. We cover 60 countries that produce light vehicles. That's every producing country in the world, 6 regions. 2021, well, like I said, we're 15.25 for North America. We're going to get back to about the mid to low 16 million in North America over the next couple years. And then we're going to get to some stability. And we're going to talk about the stability in a second. But if you look at the whole chart, obviously the largest player of the Asia Pacific chart here is China. It's 75% of that blue chart. And we're going to see some stability. So this idea of it's not new players coming in, but existing players that say they have a piece of the pie and then joining up and making larger and larger players out of it are really going to be what's happening. It's the collaboration, this basically combination of forces to be more globally relevant. What's important is this million unit club. So million unit club says, look, I'm a manufacturer of vehicles. I have the consistency of a vehicle platform. I now have my entire supply chain, everything from logistics and everything inside of this. I have power in the industry. And these are the brand owners that build over 1 million units of their brand, regardless of their joint ventures, across the globe. And the usual suspects always bubble to the top: Toyota, Volkswagen, Stellantis, Hyundai, etc. But what's happening here is, look at the inductees that are coming in the last couple years. So in 2010, Great Wall, Geely, Tata, SAIC, Subaru, building over 1 million units. And some of these don't have production here in North America. North America is the holy grail. They're looking to establish a footprint here. So now these become the new customers, those that have had zero experience in this market that need their hand held through the entire production and delivery system of their product. So the idea is not just focusing on your current customers and how they're going to build their business, but who's your next customer that you may not be working with? And how do you establish a conversation with them today? Because the long run, they will be here. And the silver award goes to, half a million to 1 million units by 2028. Beijing, BYD, Chery, Dongfeng, again, all Asian-based manufacturers, all looking for a piece of the American pie. So the idea is build those conversations now. See how they want to come in here. Are they going to partner? Are they going to build relationships like with Ha and things like that? How are they going to be here, and how can you help them establish a strong footprint in North America? So in terms of North America, I want to pick 2016 as a high watermark, right? Things were humming along in North America. It was great. 17.8 million units of light vehicle production happening during that year. And obviously the dip comes, and 2020 was 13, and now we're coming out. But when we come out, you see we never hit that North America 17.8 in our future forecast. There's no need to anymore. We have different CAFE rules. We have different ways. You don't have to build those low margin passenger cars to offset your carbon footprint anymore. Different ways of calculating that based on cars and pickup trucks and large vehicles, right? And the build where you sell mentality is becoming more and more important. This idea of better utilization, high capacity utilization of their vehicle production plants to build where you sell. And if it's not being sold here, either remove it from the portfolio or ship it off to somewhere it is being sold, AKA usually the answer there is China. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, we break it up into the Detroit 3, the European-based manufacturers, Asia-Pacific manufacturers, and the EV players like a Rivian and Tesla. And we see who's contributing to this outlook. And you see in 2024 out, it's stable. Everyone is at high utilization of their facilities. They're making the investments. They're filling those plants. They're realizing that the better utilization, the better cost structure, the better way we can keep those costs down for our consumers and our supply chain. So we're really seeing a better way of manufacturing in our future. If we break North America into the three key markets of Mexico, Canada, and the United States, North America, a compounded annualized growth rate is looking at just over 3.6% by 2028. North America's on the high side of that. Canada's on the low side of that. Well, why is that happening? Well, Canada's reinventing themselves. Canada realized they can't be victim anymore to whatever the Detroit 3 wanted to give them or take away. Oshawa was shut down. Oakville was in the radar. Equinox at production at Ingersoll goes from 300,000 per year to 30,000 bright drops planned in the future, dropping it to 10% of production capacity. They said, look, we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to become the Silicon Valley of the North. We want to become an alternative propulsion force to be reckoned with. We want to be the place that if you're coming in North America, you have a footprint here and you want to play, we will be your way into North America and the US consumer. So really, really diving into that conversation and saying who is reinventing themselves and how are they going to have to be reinvented. In terms of production mix in North America, look, passenger cars, we all know this. Passenger cars go from high volume to lower volume and losing market share. The flip side of the coin, crossovers, gain volume and gain market share. So they're absorbing that passenger car market. If I had to look at one major segmentation in here, crossovers, right? All the manufacturers from 2019 to 2028 grow. Japanese-based, European-based, et cetera. But the Detroit 3 only grows by 20,000 units. And in fact, they lose market share in crossovers. We say, well, that's a problem. We say, well, maybe it's not. They're really trying to hedge their bet on a electrified future, changing up their product mix and really understanding what's going on. So you're going to see that idea of two different directions about how the manufacturer investing. From a powertrain production mix in 2021, nearly 90% of all the produced vehicles here are internal combustion engine only vehicles. A good percentage are hybrid and a small fraction of battery electric vehicles. That flips, right? We are conservative, but we like to say we're realistic in electrified space. So by 2028, we're looking at about 75% of North America vehicle production is going to be internal combustion. That's 25% is going to be alternative propulsion. It's a major move. Electrification is here to stay. It's just going to be a very, very long way to get there. If we break it up by country, obviously United States is in the lead, followed by Canada, then by Mexico in that mix. Now, if we look at North production highlights, we look at the fact that we're seeing more mid-sized pickups coming in. We see Bronco being reinvented. We see every manufacturing having multiple crossovers in their portfolio, which is really making a hugely competitive and razor-sharp market. Innovation in electrification. Look, Tesla's a unicorn. Right? Not everyone should be a Tesla fighter. They have identified success as really not profitability, but what they could be. Detroit 3 pushing heavy in electrification, using North America as a global export hub. And obviously Mexico's not going right anytime soon in terms of their footprint. In terms of
I think we've lost Joe for a moment there. I think we're just going
opportunity. Here's the short list. Okay, so if we look at that, we say, well, they all have their own way. GAC basically bought up half of the Detroit Auto Show 2 years ago. Chery's trying to build partnerships to bring their products in. BYD, Warren Buffett backed. End of story right there. Just if he promotes it, BYD becomes a force to be reckoned with. Geely with an ownership of Volvo, Lotus, Aston Martin, targeting a Lincoln Co. and Polestar brands. SAIC has always been looking at the North American market, and a list of EV players all looking here, all needing their way, and their entire logistics and supply chain has to be bulletproof for them to be successful. In terms of key platform launches, like I said, the Bronco is a big one because it's now a Jeep fighter, right? GM with their Bright Drop being that BV1 platform to Canada in 2021, saying maybe we're going to get in the contract manufacturing business, right? If we can find 5 customers giving us 40 to 50,000 units of commercial EV vans, all of a sudden we're going to refill that plant. It's going to be a long time, but you're going to see the mix of how production changes. Big EV push. BEV3 is the big one for Cadillacs and Chevys and Buick variants. BUT with the Hummer and the Sierras and the Silverados. TE1 and TE2 and T3 platforms at Ford. GE1, GE2, multiple dedicated platforms coming. And again, look at all the new entries on the right-hand side, all looking at the next 18 months to basically make their mark in North America. Real quick, you can't talk about automotive, you can't talk about China, right? There's an unsustainable force in China. 100 brand owners are slated for production in 2028. So think of 100 GMs, 100 Volkswagens in one market. China's not going to support that. They're going to make the small ones get together, become larger ones, or get out of the business. So the mix of players in China that are going to continue to have attrition and consolidation, and then want to take that and move it over here into our market, got to really pay attention to them because they're all itching for a piece here. Okay, electrification. Lots of things to talk about electrification, but there's an underlying theme here. There's many ways to propel a vehicle, right? So if we take gas and diesel as the macro and take the micro to be the alternative propulsion, you have multiple types of hybrids, multiple types of fuel types, right? And then you have your plug-ins, and then you have your battery electric vehicles. So on a global basis in 2010, 0.03% of vehicles were built were pure battery electric. Under 2% in 19. We actually had growth in a COVID year of under 3%. So by calling for over 9% of pure battery electrics, which others may feel is conservative, is tripling the market in 7 years. 7 years is two and a half life cycles away in automotive speak. This is aggressive targets in a glacially speed market such as automotive. So we really got to be realistic on what the market's going to be. And everyone says, well, North America's behind the 8 ball. We're not. We're actually pushing 10% of battery electrics in our production portfolio by 2028. So really moving at the same pace of the world, if not a little better. So it's really important to understand how that's moving going forward. All right, so this chart always tells the story of EVs, right? There's multiple ways to look at the market. There's an economic only approach where you read the news, you start piling numbers together, you take your ruler out, you draw 2 lines, and say, yep, everything's gonna be electric. And then you take the bottom up approach, which we do, really diving into detail, winners and losers, capacity constraints, competition, everything in between that makes this. And the blue, the dark blue and the light blue basically represent the legacy players like the GMs, and the light blue, the Teslas and the Rivians. They've never built an internal combustion engine vehicle, but now they're building it. And we have growth, right? And then we layer in the dark green, the light green. No self-respecting EV player is going to give you a production volume of less than 50,000 units a year. And they're going to push that down a logistics supplier and say, be ready. We're going to have 50,000 units going all over North America. Not going to happen for a lot of them. But we have to layer in what they're saying. Now we have this hockey stick, this idea of really, this is not how automotive works. And then we layer in the futurists and the optimists. And I say, nope, it's going to happen. In the next 7 years, we're going to have meteoric rise in pure battery electric vehicles. 35 million units are the optimists are calling for pure battery electric vehicles. Obviously, we don't believe it, but let's just pretend it happens. Let's say all the hurdles, logistics, range anxiety, lithium is free, whatever it might be, are completely eliminated. Well, it still means that 65% of the world still needs an internal combustion engine. Because everyone's saying, oh no, we're in trouble. We're going to be walking away from this entire part of our supply chain. No, you're not. We have a significant symbiotic relationship between electrification and pure internal combustion engine going into our very long foreseeable future. Now, North America, right? In 2028, we have 68 unique battery electric vehicles, but in 19, there was only 8, right? Think about that growth. In that same time frame, we have 28 different brands wanting to build EV vehicles, pushing 1.7 million unit vehicle, 1.7 million units. In 19, 3 brands, Chevy, Nissan, and Tesla. And 2 of them were very utility-based vehicles. Tesla being the only sports car in it that everyone's trying to reach for. So short time frame, big targets. Not saying it's not doable because this is our forecast, but it maybe doesn't have that hockey stick that a lot of people are calling for. This is the telling story, electrified platforms. 2017, 75 vehicle platforms globally were that had electrification. You could take out the internal combustion engine, the transmission. You can bolt in the electrified platform propulsion system. It didn't work, great, take it out of portfolio. That switches. Tens of billions of dollars being invested in dedicated sleds, skateboards, whatever you want to call them, pictures on the top of the screen. So that's 78%. These vehicles cannot be retrofitted for engines and transmissions, no drive shaft. So it's a too big to fail proposition the manufacturer doing. However, they all can't win. That's not how this thing, not everyone wins in this space. If we took everyone's plans together, even in a non-electrified world, and said, hey, here they are, the market would be 30% higher because no one's building a poor vehicle. No one's going to be cannibalized by not only their competition, but maybe their own product set. So this chart is really going to see where you're going to see forcing this idea of electrified platforms have to work or else. And they're going to pass that force all the way down through the entire stakeholders of of delivering that vehicle. So I want to end off this thing called NAFTA Plus. So NAFTA Plus says, look, there's commonality of production. There's economies of scale. So if we can have this idea where we design a vehicle and the underpinnings of that vehicle are the same all over the world, we just put different type of programs on there to satisfy a local consumer. That helps our production, our manufacturing, and reduces error. And we can go to suppliers and give them a significant amount of deals. So if you look at the top 10 architectures 19, you see the top one at 7 million units across the world. 25 million units on 10 platforms only represented 28% of global production. That's a significant amount of global production. But if we fast forward to 2028, 45% are 10 platforms. So if you're working with these customers or not working with these customers, and you see a significant play in here, this is where they're going to want to make their money. Understanding who these players are, consistency of production, size of vehicles, destination, everything in between, putting more and more pressure on everyone that goes into the cost they have to pass on to the consumer that's going to help them get by. So I wanted to, I know we went through a lot of information today. I really thank you for a lot. We're going to have hopefully some great Q&A, try to give you a little taste of everything. And again, I really appreciate your time and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was a fantastic analysis. We really appreciate that. And, I think for our audience, that's just as we heard from the poll, the stable planning and production is really what they're looking for. I'm not sure that that's in the immediate horizon, but a really interesting transformation to come also on the AV side, as you outlined, and with some new players. I want to go right in on the on the sharp end, if you like, on the semiconductor side. How do you see, are we already starting to see some easing of it? Where do you kind of see an easing out or an end line, if you like, on the current trajectory? Does this go into 2022? Maybe starting with the North America view, and if you give us a global snapshot on that.
Yeah, we're talking about Q3, end of Q3 is we're sort of seeing a bottoming out, specifically in North America of that chart, right? We show that North America is the one that's being penalized the most in terms of this. You're going to see a lot more creativity and hopefully smartness that goes into that lessons learned of how do we prepare ourselves in the future. More vertical integration or vehicle manufacturing to say, look, we got to take control of the semiconductor. Ford did it with aluminum, right? Because they say, hey, we got all this aluminum we're going to put in truck. We better take control of that, of the material, so we can then push it out to the supply base. You can see more partnerships, more small scale chip players that are going to try to scale up and take advantage of government money because it's an issue of national security. They're really going to take advantage of it and say, yep, give me the billions, I'll build some more plants. So I think we're going to hopefully find a way that we won't be able to replicate this problem in the future. But I'd say, it will go into 2022. But the big vehicles, the profitable ones, are going to be mostly coming out in a Q3 timeframe.
And you obviously mentioned about the vehicles that we most want to recover, whether your F-150s or high profitable vehicles. Do you already see a reprioritization in production planning and flows? In terms of OEMs building the vehicles they most want already where they can, or changing programs to kind of maneuver around these challenges?
Absolutely. So, the short answer is high profit, low inventory vehicles. That's the ones they want. Now you see them already building trucks. At first they said, we're going to build a truck, we'll store them, but when the chips come in, then we'll get them off the dealership. Then we'll say, well, you know what? Why don't we just eliminate it? Why don't we take start stop out? Why don't we go to analog speedometers to the digital? Let's take out stuff that's not life safety issues, and pull the content out just to get them on the market. So you're going to see much more of that, really reconfiguring that product and just make sure that they have the more on the lots. That's the biggest issue, right? The lots are just sparse with products. So now all of a sudden, the manufacturers go, great, we're not going to deal with consumers anymore. Everyone's going to pay full price, if not more, because the supply is so limited. And so everyone's had pent up in the pandemic. They're out there, they're buying new vehicles. So it's this perfect storm, unfortunately, but you will see bigger pushes in their highest profit vehicles are the ones that are going to want to move.
And on that point, obviously with the low inventory, as you just mentioned, spiffs are low, incentives obviously quite low, prices going up. We also see inflationary pressures in the supply chain elsewhere too, in terms of material costs. Does this hit the bottom line at some point? Because of higher prices, does it start to put the brakes a little on some of the recovery, or actually, as you kind of outlined, the dynamics are now in a way more favorable for the OEMs to be able to sell into this higher end model mix?
It's going to be a combination. I mean, traditionally when this happens, the manufacturers, because they have these global platforms, because they're giving more volume considerations to suppliers, they say, great, we're giving you more, but now you got to give back. You got to share the pain through the good times and the bad. It's a marriage here. So we're going to need better margins because, yes, in the end, you'll reap the benefit. And those suppliers that weren't prepared, those that didn't have a cash reserve and finally just eked their way through COVID, are going to be in a real difficult spot. Those that prepared and hopefully learned from the past are going to be the same. That goes all the way down to, obviously the logistics suppliers, right? This idea of, I'm being asked for this major glut. Oh, be prepared to all of a sudden get 20,000 units per day to a plan and say, no, that's not what it is. And now you're sitting with this cost structure. So it's got to be that healthy balance we always say between manufacturer and everyone that's supporting them. But unfortunately, they always try to find a way to push that cost into the people that are supporting the build for the greater good.
Some audience questions here. Someone's asking about unforeseen challenges in contract manufacturing. I guess it's maybe pulling back from that one for a moment. We've seen a number of partnerships with some new players, whether that's Fisker with Magna, I think Canoo with Nedcar in Europe, but also on the traditional side is with EV as well. How do you see contract manufacturing developing? Is it going to be on those kind of niche EV products, or is it going to be more wide? How do you see that? What are some challenges ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a local one that's big. GM building Acuras and Hondas, right? They're going to have that new electrified platform that's going to have a Ridgeline on it. And it's for, again, the greater good because they have to fill that capacity. In my view, if we have a huge push in electrified platforms are they have a lot less parts. There's no emission standards. There's no recovery of fluids and EPA issues because they don't not many in the vehicle at all. And the manufacturing capability is if you could build an underpinning of a battery trade platform and just put different hi-hats on it, it is a perfect fit for a contract manufacturer. It becomes your own little Lego machine that says, okay, today I'm going to build this truck for Widgets Incorporated and this one is international over here, whatever it might be. So as you change the product mix, I think this idea of contract manufacturing is only going to accelerate. So talk to the ones that want to do it because that's going to be their way in, or the established ones like a Magna Steyr saying, look, we know what we're doing. A lot of people don't know how to build a vehicle. They've got SPAC money. They'll say, hey, I got an idea. I got a 3D printer and a dream. Do me a favor. I want to build this. They go get some SPAC money. Here's $2 billion. And they say, okay, now what? How do I build this thing? And then they're going to say, okay, supplier, you know how to build this. Here's $1 billion of that $2 billion. Go for it. And I think you're going to see a lot of that in the next decade.
It's interesting too. I mean, I also to note, I think your slide obviously on the kind of the rise of the skateboard EV platform, however we define it, the pure EV platforms, are simultaneously the 10 largest global platforms. I don't think they intersect yet, do they? If I was correct, I only quoted quick. So at the moment,
Yeah.
even in 10 years, the 10 biggest platforms won't be those EV skateboards.
You hit the nail on the head, because I'm glad you saw that too, because it is true. We tell people there's all this buzz, it's the tail wagging the dog. And again, I'm not anti-EV. We just try to be realistic. But if you look at those 10, very, very few, like you might have some on the MQB and things like that, but very, very few of those vehicles are battery electric, let alone pure battery electric players. They may have some alternate propulsion in there that they're saying they're electrified, right? That's the message. If I'm electrified versus electric, those are two different things. 48 volts electrified, start stop is electrified on some people's books, but that's not electric. So you're right. We are way out. We are way out from a truly tipping point of electrification, regardless of what the manufacturer trying to hit with these 2035, 40, and 50 targets.
Absolutely. I think, but at the same time, you make an interesting point. I mean, putting the US, mapping it on the global map, in fact, it's probably a bit ahead of global market share to come on the EV side. Okay, if we compare that directly with maybe the EU in the same period, or even with China, it might be different. I mean, the investments we're seeing just coming. I mean, is it fair to say that the pace has accelerated, in the view out, compared to what we might have been thinking even 12 or 18 months ago?
Absolutely, pace. And I always come back to Tesla's redefining. Before it was a Chevy Bolt and a Nissan Leaf. It's not slighting that vehicle, but it's a very targeted market. It was for someone that was very environmentally conscious, and they didn't care about speed and power and things like that. It was a utility-based vehicle that gets from point A to point B. Tesla goes, you know what? I'm a sports car company, but let's electrify this thing. When people bought Teslas, it wasn't their primary car. It was a $100,000 second car that sat in it, and they dealt with the warts and the misalignment of bodies and things that weren't there. And they're fantastic vehicles. I'm not slighting them, but they said, hey, this is doable now. I can literally invent a car overnight, make it go like stink really fast, have really cool over-the-air updates, change the color, give me some power, really cool stuff. And oh, by the way, it's electrified. You go, okay, that's not bad. So all of a sudden you're changing the dynamic of the consumer. They're able to play the saving the world one car at a time on conversation, but they're really playing, look, when I stomp on this accelerator, look how cool this thing is. And they're trying to offset those other range anxiety and plug-in station issues and everything else that people that were anti-EV say, nope, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, winning hearts over minds and wallets, maybe, but that was certainly a way to do it. We have another question here. Great insights, Joe. Can you say something about the growth in trucks, commercial vehicle electrification, and federal fleets under President Biden? And perhaps that's an interesting segue to talk as well about what we see the sort of Biden kind of regulations or ambitions, how we see them impacting on the market in this way.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the idea is improving optics. If you're able to say, my Amazon Prime truck that drives in my neighborhood every day, if that thing's electrified or is making no noise, all of a sudden you're turning heads because now you have trust in this company that's delivering your products every single day. Now you have a commercial fleet. So you're being exposed to these things. The government just handing money over to general consumers saying, go buy more EVs is not the best way to do it. They have to say, we have to practice what we preach. And we have to invest in electrified fleets so that A, we are doing what we're supposed to do as a country. We're trying to finish follow Paris Accord. We're trying to really get there. But B, we're trying to say, hey, consumer, you should too. We have your back. We're not expecting you to carry all the water. So I really do think that idea of a fleet introduction is going to be one of the major driving factors to try to convince more consumers to jump on and basically be the secondary effect to build the EV market.
And obviously some interesting players coming into the mix there, whether it's your Rivians as well as the traditional OEMs in that space. Maybe on that, you mentioned some new startups, Chinese players who will look high up the market, at least North America, if not the US. But if we kind of again look at the current administration policy, Joe, we spoke I think on election day 8 months ago, whenever it was, when we didn't know what was going to come. And I think one of the things you said then was don't expect huge changes on certain things like China's relations with China. Well, here we are now. How do we see that? I mean, is the prospect of a Chinese OEM coming into the US any greater or less than it was then, or is it still going to be via different routes?
I think it's greater, right? Because our administration's saying, okay, we have to. Obviously, previous administration was like, look, we have to have some protectionism, and we have to really focus on our market, right? Charity begins at home, and then we go out. The new administration is more, trying to be more altruistic on a global scale. But it's very difficult to constantly throw money in a different way and not support the home team. Now, if as that Chinese manufacturer comes in, it's also going to be very difficult for the UAW to say, you're giving them money to come in here to make a footprint, and you're taking away our jobs. So, government, you got to find a way to also get them unionized. You got to give them very strict rules if they want to play. Look, there was a time that we didn't expect Japanese manufacturers to have a lion's share, and they saw a need. We had land yachts, and then they came with a small vehicle. They serviced a need. Korean manufacturers came in with a 100,000-mile warranty, fantastic, a lot of content on a really stylish product at a great price. Now they're a force to be reckoned with. So the China market is definitely a when, not an if. The problem is it's a delicate balance, because you got to make sure that the current administration is still supporting the U.S. and understanding that there's still issues in China that we're, globally that we got to pay attention to. But then how do you bring them in so there's sort of that win-win combination? It's going to be tricky, but it's going to happen.
I have another audience question looking at kind of upstream supply chain, wondering about potential other raw material shortages, particularly around the shift from ICE to EV. May they be able to keep up? And maybe that's also perhaps a path to talk a bit about the battery supply chain. Obviously, we're seeing huge investments there. Could any of that be a block to growth if all of these parts of the supply chain and suppliers don't scale up with the pace that has been announced, or that some of the OEMs are trying to move?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right now there is not enough lithium in the world to support all the business plans that exist today. Nowhere near. But again, as we said, we're talking about vehicles that might not be built for 8-10 years. So suppliers right now are bidding on programs that aren't going to start until 2024. That vehicle is going to have a 5-year life cycle. So now all of a sudden, we're looking at 8 years of that same vehicle. Oh, and by the way, that vehicle has to have all the tooling around for the next 10 years to support aftermarket and recalls and things like that. So it gives us a very long window to play with. I'm banking on the fact there's going to be more innovation. We'll see more solid state, more graphene, more focusing on trying to get rid of the need for rare earth metals. Because if we use today's calculation for our forecast, no way we hit it. But everyone is on the playing field now. Everyone's saying they're going to win. They're not all going to be the winner. So they all have to force their way in and say, yep, here's our numbers and here's what we're going to hit. Everyone's doing a little gamemanship. You're going to do 20 billion? Hey, I'll do 25 billion. So you're going to see a lot of that setting the stage. But looking at today and looking at 10 years from now, I think it's going to be a completely different landscape we're looking at.
And when we look out further, I mean, one of the clear trends, obviously talked about in recent years, shift to mobility as a service, OEMs becoming more mobility service providers. We've seen some at least dabbling in subscription models, at the very least, big increases, relative increases in leasing and stuff. How does this trend impact vehicle ownership and the volume mix as you look further out? Does it ultimately hit and reduce demand and production?
Absolutely. That's what we say is, in forecasting business is very tricky because it's easy to take in history and current and say, hey, that's going to be our future. And the barometer in North America has always been, well, as long as the US sells 17 million units per year, that's a stable market. I can argue the fact that 15 years from now, maybe it's 14 million a year, right? You're going to have people that are buying EVs that have much longer life cycles. And those that saying, please don't force me. I'm going to hold on to this car till the wheels fall off. That's going to reduce the sales cycle going forward. So when you reduce that sales cycle, it changes the entire mix of what success is. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see the landscape change. You're going to see volume change. And what's happened is we are now trained to be a subscription-based consumer, right? I'm not going to buy a $1,000 iPhone, but I'll pay $35 over 30 months, right? I'm going to get rid of my cable, but I'll have 14 different streaming services. At the end of the day, we're sort of used to this. In the future, the manufacturers are going to have a mobility solution. The car is going to be the loss leader, but the information it's gaining on where you are, where you're going, where you've been, what you can promote and sell on the open market is going to be their biggest revenue stream. So you'll be able to say, you know what? I want to buy into the GM plan. Here's my $800 a month. And today I want a sports car, and tomorrow I need to move something, so I need a van, and I need a crossover to get my kids to soccer. And you'll have access to them almost sort of, those are the vehicles I want because I don't need to have full ownership anymore. It's really going to change the mix, but the manufacturer constantly looking at how are they going to switch that revenue stream. They know the volumes are going to drop. So how are they going to continue making the same, if not more in the future? And that's where this idea of subscription-based mobility services are going to be the leader.
And I think for this audience, whether it's suppliers, vehicle logistics providers, are key aspects of service, some of the dynamics with change. It's a good time to start getting into the mix there, looking at different areas, whether it's home deliveries, whether it's supplying parts of the service side. I think that only becomes even more important as we look at the mix, even if it's not all about that pure moving of the metal as it's traditionally been. Mm-hmm. Well, Joe, listen, this has been really, really fascinating. So great inside data. As I mentioned to our audience, the presentation we're going to make available on the platform here, as well as this session will be available on demand if you've joined us late and you want to go back and check some of that out. But we really want to thank you, Joe, for all of the sharing insights, and we look forward to having you on again really soon.
Chris, thank you. It's always a pleasure to work with your team, top notch, and I hope get some great value at it. I enjoy the rest of your conference, and I hope to talk to everyone soon.
Thanks again, Joe. Appreciate it.
You too. Take care.
So thanks to everyone for putting your questions through. If we didn't get to a few of it, we'll make sure Joe can see those as well. Interact on the platform. Keep them coming. Those comments are so valuable, and really we're all about interactivity here. Before we take a short coffee break and come back, because we're going to be back in about 15 minutes with Brian Stapp, a dealer in the US, who's going to give us a dealer view. We just want to give you a little preview, a little snapshot to tell you a couple of things coming up. As you know, the rest of our event, we've got great content all throughout the day. That'll be available on demand. We've got our digital editions coming, programs of live streams, and all that you hopefully come to expect from Auto Logistics Now. But later in the year, we also have some upcoming events that we're now planning that we do want to make sure we put on your radar now, and we'll remind you of these a couple of times throughout the event. Detroit Automotive Logistics Supply Chain Global. It's an event that many of you know and hopefully love over the past 20 odd years. We're looking to be back in Detroit with you on the ground safely as we possibly can. So do join us then. Get in touch with our team if you're interested. We're in the process of planning that now for Detroit. And of course, with it will come digital connectivity and the ability to share more widely. So we're not going to leave digital events behind by any stretch, but want to just announce it here and make sure you know it. And anyone watching on LinkedIn who's interested to get in touch if you're interested, speaking, participating. Our team's ready to talk about it. And of course, Finished Vehicle Logistics, North America Live, looking to be back in California come November. Really excited to meet many of you there, as well as again, producing and sharing this more widely online too. But we'll be looking to safely connect again later in the year in the US as the restrictions continue to lift. So be in touch with us because we'll share more with it. But you're the first to hear it, and we wanted you to hear it from us. So thanks again. Thanks again to Joe McCabe. Thanks to everyone for tuning in for our first session. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
What do nearly half of new vehicles sold in North America have in common? They arrived with the help of ICL. ICL Systems provides a fully managed, web-native solution that gives auto manufacturers end-to-end visibility of their finished vehicle supply chain, from manufacturing plant to dealership, and everywhere in between. Managing communication with multiple trading partners is costly and complex. With ICL, OEMs can connect with all of their supply chain partners in one place. Tracking begins when a production order is placed, continues through all modes of transport, and every step along the way, with updates about pre-delivery inspections, dealer trades, dwell time, order status, and more. ETA to final delivery is continuously updated and shared with supply chain partners and stakeholders. And our invoice audit system ensures OEMs pay for the right work at the right time, at the right rate, to the right vendor. Ready to maximize performance, savings, reliability, and efficiency? Contact ICL today.
Horizon Auto Logistics is your automotive terminal, processor and logistics operator for finished vehicles and equipment. We are dedicated in providing a variety of professional, technical and value-added services within the automotive logistics industry. Inside the port, we handle vessel discharging or loading. We stage cars inside the port and then shuttle the cars to the final automotive yard.
Our Puente Villarrica yard is 15 kilometers away from the port. It has 106 acres of available land and can handle an annual throughput of about 500,000 cars.
The vehicle processing center is really the heart of our operation. This particular one is being built out to 3,000 square meters.
Here in Mexico, we have a fleet of 40 dedicated equipment and can scale the capacity much beyond this number if required. Horizon Auto Logistics. Innovation through foresight.